If it's Hump Day, it's Hemp Day. I'm Robert Colangelo, host of Green Sense Radio and founder of Hemplet Farms. I'll be the moderator for the weekly webinar series, and I welcome you, and thanks for joining us, and a happy Earth Day to everybody. Justin Swanson's our first speaker. He's a tireless soldier in the hemp wars. He's been sheltered in place with one wife and two two-year-olds for so many weeks, he's lost count of the days. In his day job, he's vice president at Bose Public Affairs Group and also counsel at law for Bose, McKinney & Evans. And he's happy to join us and provide us a very timely update on the hemp flower litigation currently pending with the Seventh Circuit Court. And he's also going to give an update on the state Delta-9 and total THC regulations. Justin, thanks for joining.
So we're going to go ahead and get started here. My name is Justin Swanson. I am Vice President at Bose Public Affairs Group, and then I'm of counsel at Bose McKinney & Evans. So I have a foot in both the lobbying and the legal world when it comes to hemp. I'm also president of the Midwest Hemp Council and co-founded that with two great people, Alan Kimball and Jamie Petty. And so here's kind of our roadmap for today. I wanted to take us through, just quickly unwrap the 18 Farm Bill. I'm sure most of the people on the webinar are somewhat familiar with this, at least I hope they are. We'll take a quick look at Indiana's response to the 2018 Farm Bill. We'll have a discussion on total THC versus Delta-9 THC and why that is so important for anyone who's entering the hemp industry to understand the distinction there. We'll do a quick dive on the Indiana Hemp Emergency Rule that came out in December, but I'll probably leave the meat of that to Don unless anyone has specific questions for me at the end. Sorry, I'm trying to keep up here. And then we'll look at a discussion on what is a legal hemp product in Indiana. What is the legal definition? And again, that will kind of go back into this total THC versus Delta-9 THC discussion. And then I'll end with just some quick 2020 general advice from what I've seen from last year and some of the differences I'm seeing this year, both positive and negative. And then I will also provide a timely update on the pending hemp litigation, craft hemp flower litigation in federal court in the Seventh Circuit. We had oral arguments last Tuesday. It was over the phone, so I can provide an update on that as well. Okay, so really what the 18 Farm Bill was very important for two main reasons. One, it finally and permanently decoupled hemp from marijuana, so they removed hemp from the definition of marijuana, which is still considered a Schedule I controlled substance at the federal level. Another important thing it does is it allows states, if they want to be the primary regulator of hemp production in their jurisdiction. It also made it very clear that FDA is maintaining jurisdictions over CBD products, and we expect these quote unquote soon. So knowing the federal government, that could be either tomorrow or 4 years from now. And as I mentioned, it'll authorize the states to submit state plans, which Indiana has done. And I can give a quick update on that as well. And then more importantly, too, it also made it very black and white that states are not to be spending money or time or effort interfering with interstate transportation of hemp and hemp products. This is big because, the industry has litigated for years against the DEA in terms of allowing these programs to start up under the 14 Farm Bill. So this is a great addition and a layer of protection for the industry operating across state lines. And I think everyone understands that this is going to be a regional approach for people to be successful. And folks are going to have to reach across state lines to make new connections and develop business relationships that make sense for their operations. So what was Indiana's response to the 18 Farm Bill? It was Senate Enrolled Act 516, which was passed in 2019. This mirrored the federal definition of hemp with a catch, and I'll hit on that in a little bit. The definition of hemp is important because when you compare it with the 14 Farm Bill and the 18 Farm Bill, Congress actually expanded that definition of hemp to include essentially anything that is coming from that hemp plant so long as it's below 0.3% THC. And so that was a good recognition that, there's a lot of questions on what is and what isn't a legal product. And so Congress decided, okay, we're going to expand this definition and make it ultra clear that really what we're trying to do here is offer our farmers, the next generation of farmers, current farmers, an opportunity to really learn a new industry and help build that from the ground up. Another important thing it did was it established the Indiana Hemp Advisory Committee for the purposes of providing advice to the seed commissioner in the development of a state plan. This was important for a number of reasons. Mainly, it probably wasn't necessary to put in statute, but sometimes you need to do this to make sure that all of the appropriate stakeholders are at the table having the discussions and coming up with solutions to potential problems. So we were very, very happy for Midwest Hemp Council to have a seat on that table, working with law enforcement, growers, processors, Department of Health, ISDA, seed commissioner, really all the players that need to be on the same page if a new industry like this is going to develop. So we're very happy about the establishment of that. It required Indiana to submit a state plan by no later than December 31st, 2019, which we did. I believe we submitted it right around then, and we did not get approval for that state plan, and I'm sure Don will hit on that a little bit, but we're hoping to get that resubmitted based on the comments and the feedback we got from USDA sometime next month. And really, as a result of Senate Roll Act 516, for the first time in Indiana history, we now have rules regulating the production and processing of hemp here in Indiana. And I can't stress how big of a deal that is. We've had language and statute since 2014 requiring rules to be developed to allow the industry to grow. And we went several years without those. The seed commissioner, along with taking input, they spent a ton of time taking input from stakeholders, both individually and as a group through the Indiana Hemp Advisory Committee. So we're very, very thankful for those, and we think it's a great start to really at least give some guardrails to businesses who want to do it right, and give confidence to continue to invest in their community and their business. Because I'll tell you guys, 2 years ago, there was an open-ended question on whether or not hemp processing in Indiana was even legal. Our statute was actually silent on it. And now we have regulations specifically for processors, encouraging them, to get to the good manufacturing processes and stay in line with some of the food grade requirements at the federal level. So we're really setting the bar, I think, high, and making sure that the industry standard in Indiana is such that consumers can trust the product coming from it, but also, they're not overburdensome where companies and people are not willing to invest in the state, at least in this industry. So ultimately, as a result of the 2019 state legislation, we licensed just over 5,300 acres of hemp in Indiana in 2019 alone. And to put that number in perspective, we grew about 24 acres as a state from 2014 to 2018. So this bill is a huge catalyst for the industry in the state. And I really applaud, the seed commissioner's office, the state chemist's office, on taking this industry head on. We know it's a tough thing to try to understand and continue to learn about. But again, I give them all the props in the world for bringing the industry along with it and allowing for input. Okay, total THC versus Delta-9 THC. This has been a raging debate really since the 14 Farm Bill passed. So I guess the next 2 slides I'm going to present an argument for why the Farm Bill, 18 Farm Bill requires Delta-9. And I'll also present the other argument that it says, no, it's total THC as well. So the proponents of a total THC interpretation based on the 18 Farm Bill, and we're talking about the definition of hemp, defines hemp as in part acids with a Delta-9 tetrahydrocannabinoid THC concentration of not more than 0.3% on a dry weight basis. Whoops, sorry, I'm losing my spot here. So really, I emphasize the word acids here because I think this is what some of the proponents of this interpretation rely on. They'll say that THCA is an acidic cannabinoid and it contains THC. So it has to be it has to be calculated for and accounted for in that formula. Proponents of Delta-9 only interpretation say it's very clear, black and white in 18 Farm Bill, of course. Basically, THCA and THC are separate and distinct molecules. THCA does not contain Delta-9. Instead, it's actually that chemical process during the testing phase that converts the THCA into a whole new molecule, which is the Delta-9. And some would say or argue that's like, asking someone to test a piece of wood for you. They burn it through the testing process and hand you back a piece of coal. I get asked about this a lot in terms of kind of where I fall on it. My personal opinion and my advice to the industry is just to get over this discussion, accept total THC as the new standard if and until Congress decides to make it extremely clear that, states or the USDA is not to be adding in the THCA in that. But I think it's kind of a dead argument. The USDA interim final rules came out and made it very clear. If you want a state plan approved under the 18 Farm Bill, you will decarboxylate those samples and get a total THC measurement. And Indiana is very clear. We are a total THC state as well. So that's really why it matters. And it matters more in particular if you're doing businesses across state lines. You need to make sure you understand, if you're sending biomass across state lines, you need to understand the laws and the regulations regulating hemp production and processing and buying and all that, no matter, in every state you're operating in or selling in. So it's really important. This is a quick chart from Hemp Industry Daily that's tracking basically what states are choosing to do under the 14 or the 18 Farm Bills. What you've seen here is some states have decided to stick with the 14 Farm Bill for now and operate under that authority. Because if you recall, the 18 Farm Bill actually allowed the 14 pilot programs to exist for another year after USDA officially releases their interim final rule. And really what this is doing is it's buying some of these states who are sticking to the Delta-9 interpretation only. It gives them, their farmers, another year to operate under Delta-9. And really what that does is open up, I think, some of your options for genetics. And if you're growing for CBD, it's going to give you a better shot of getting a bigger yield on your CBD content. For Indiana purposes, again, we're a total THC state. I don't see that changing anytime soon. So I think the days, at least in Indiana, of getting 15 to 18% CBD, at least right now for this growing season, are probably far gone. And if people are promising you that, that should be a giant red flag for you to look into it a little bit more. And as you'll see, Indiana, I don't think this is quite accurate, the way it depicts Indiana. Again, we submitted our state plan, got rejected, working on now resubmitting that based off the comments from USDA. And Don and I, Robinson, were actually just talking about this. To be very clear, it doesn't really matter in Indiana which Farm Bill we operate under, whether it's the 14 or the 18 Farm Bill, because we do have these regulations in place that are effective as of December of 19. And so that's really what you need to be looking at in terms of staying compliant and your obligations under the rules if you're producing or handling hemp. So this is kind of the slide that summarizes why it matters. Again, we issued the rule in December of 19. There are several other states. I think it's up to 20 or 22 states now that are opting to stay under the 14 Farm Bill. I wouldn't use what authority they're operating under as authority of whether they're a Delta-9 state or a total THC state. You really need to do your own due diligence. Go onto their, the state's Department of Ag website and figure out what the rules are and how they interpret the definition of THC to make sure you stay compliant. And again, as I mentioned, you need to have a firm understanding of every state law in terms of hemp if you're deciding to operate and do business in those states, because it could come back to haunt you if you don't fully understand it. So compliance is key, right? I mean, this is a very highly regulated industry that's, I think a lot of people get gloss over that fact. You need a license to grow it. You need a license to handle it if you're not, if it's not your own growing product. And you really need to understand, we have about almost 20 pages of regulations that came out in December. And there's a lot of obligations under that and responsibility as a license holder to follow. It's really on us in the industry to follow and make sure we're trying to set that standard high and continue to raise that, because that's only going to help everybody, not only in Indiana, but really in the Midwest, if we're able to show, essentially, look, we're just like any other business, just give us reasonable regulations, and we will thrive under them. And what it did really, as I mentioned before, for the first time, we actually have clear guidance on what processors need to be doing in the state to stay compliant. And I think it's a great balance. It's, really it's the goal. If you're processing in Indiana, you really should be, if you're not already, the goal should be to have a current good manufacturing practices, procedures and processes. And that's really in line with the record keeping and showing, what you're putting in it, how you're extracting it, what solvents you're using, and all that. And what that does is help, if there's a consumer complaint or if there's a bad batch that goes out, it really helps the industry and other policymakers track down where that batch came from. And one thing I always really like to, it's important to point out, these regulations do not cover hemp products. Do not cover hemp products. It's explicit in the rules. And that kind of leads to the question, okay, Justin, well, who's regulating hemp products in Indiana? The sale of them and all that. And the answer really is I'm not aware of anybody. I think a lot of the state agencies are waiting for explicit guidance or directives from the General Assembly on who is responsible for what. This past legislative session, there was a bill that floated the idea of bringing hemp products under the jurisdiction of the ATC, which is the agency that regulates alcohol and tobacco in Indiana. That isn't an ideal outcome for us, just because we don't really want to be associated with what some refer to as kind of a sin industry or an addictive industry. So we're hoping to work with some legislators this summer to figure out a way on what that looks like. Again, with the goal of have real regulations, have real guidance on how to do this, so businesses doing it right can do it right, and kind of just continue to thrive. Growers and handlers must be properly licensed by the state seed commissioner. I'd really encourage you guys to look up the definition of handler in the rules. It's on page 2. It's section 11. It's actually a pretty broad definition. So I'd really encourage you guys to look at that. Propagation operations must have a seed dealer permit in addition to a grower's license. What that does is helps us identify who's selling what in the state, and again, it helps us track down possible bad actors that aren't doing anyone any favors. There's very clear destruction process in here for hot crops with minimal appeal opportunities. There are transportation requirements that you need to have. You need to keep a log, basically a bill of sale, where it's going. And then also, even for processors, growers, propagators, there are record retention requirements for up to 2 to 3 years sometimes, depending on the exact issue. So I really encourage you guys to get familiar with these. We're going to be working on kind of a summary of what's required under here. That way everyone can better understand their obligations and responsibilities if and when they decide to enter this market. We do have minimum acreage and square footage requirements for outdoor and indoor grows. Again, I'll let Don kind of probably dive into those a little deeper. My intent here more is to flag these for you guys to do a deeper dive on your own if it's of interest or it applies to you. So it's just a good slide to have in front of you. All right, I get asked this quite a bit. Oops. What exactly is a legal hemp product in Indiana? And this is a really important question that everyone needs to understand before they put anything in the ground or enter this industry. So basically, anything that's coming from the hemp plant that's a product, so the seed commissioner does not have authority or jurisdiction to regulate it, is what we refer to here in Indiana as a low THC hemp extract product. And what that really is anything coming from the hemp plant, as long as it's below, and I've highlighted here in red, total THC. So it's very, very clear that if you're selling vapes, you're selling hemp flower, CBD oil, all this stuff is on a total THC basis. And that's really important to understand, because that my next bullet point here is this is from our 2018 CBD bill. That this is where our definition came from. It's what really opened up and put Indiana on the map for the CBD industry, in my opinion. But there are law enforcement concerns that got taken care of here. And one of them is this idea of, well, how do we know as law enforcement that that retailer is not, hiding under the guise of low THC hemp extract and selling marijuana? Well, how about we just charge them with we'll expose them to a level 5 felony, which is up there with manslaughter. If they're knowingly doing this, taking a marijuana product and hiding it under the guise of a low THC hemp extract product. So I always like to mention that to people to really focus on the fact that this is a big deal and that you really need to understand the nuance of the laws here in Indiana and the regulations as well. So kind of the general advice for 2020 is kind of like any business model, work backwards and figure out who's going to buy your, is it a product? Are you taking it to processing? Are you doing this for biomass? Is it for fiber? If so, do they have specifications they're looking for? Is it for CBD? If so, what's the least amount of CBD content they'll take for the biomass? All this stuff is really good to know before you even think about putting it in the ground. That being said, our rules still allow for research permits and licenses. So if you're not sure, if you can't answer this question, but you just want to get a year of growing under your belt to learn, team up with a researcher. You can get some of the minimum acreage or indoor requirements waived under certain circumstances if you have a legitimate research proposal. So I'd really encourage people to take advantage of that. If you're not ready for a full-scale grow, or if you don't have an offtake agreement and you're not willing, and you don't have an offtake agreement, go the research route. There's nothing wrong with that. A year of growing in hemp is like 10 anywhere else. So take advantage of that. Make sure you spend time and money memorializing your business deals with a legally binding contract. I can't tell you how many calls I got this year and last year on, I let so-and-so from out of state come harvest and take my biomass and they haven't paid me. It's just really, really disappointing to hear because people are trusting. But with this stuff, even if you're a friend, just memorialize it and get a legally binding contract. It is so much better and so much cleaner for everybody involved. So please look into that. You need to properly vet your genetics to make sure they're appropriate for Indiana climate, soil, and light cycle. Just because it grows well in Oregon or Colorado does not mean it's going to be a good strand for Indiana's soil and light cycle and climate here. Develop relationship with labs to create and execute a THC monitoring plan. This is going to allow you to, for your growers, allow you to actually take your crop to harvest. And also signal to you if you may need to harvest earlier than you thought in order to stay compliant. Take security of your operations seriously. I had a number of clients last year who their grows got vandalized, stolen from, ranging from high schoolers to adults thinking it's marijuana, or if they understand it's, the hemp industry, they understand there's value in there. So just take that very, very seriously. Security cameras, and I wouldn't be posting a whole lot of stuff on Facebook or social media, telling everyone where this is happening. And then lastly, just understand your legal obligations as a hemp grower or handler. It's better for the industry and it makes the seed commissioner's life a little easier. So what's next for hemp? This is a slide I've had on really since last year. So we were at one point waiting for USDA rules to come out, which we were expecting in August. They came out end of October. We were anxiously awaiting for the seed commissioner to issue the regulations, which came out in December, which is great. We are still waiting for clear guidance from the FDA on how to offer and sell consumer CBD products. And then lastly, in a very timely update, we actually had, for those not familiar, in Senate Rolled Act 516, which was Indiana's response. I mentioned that we mirrored the federal hemp definition with a catch. Well, the General Assembly decided to carve out hemp flower, refer to that as smokable hemp, and they criminalized it. So they shut out farmers and consumers from the market, one of the most lucrative markets right now in the industry. And so a group got together and challenged that in the U.S. District Court, and we're successful. Basically arguing, look, you can't change the definition of hemp. So it was basically a preemption argument. We had oral arguments last Tuesday. Last Tuesday. It was over the phone, which was kind of disappointing for me because I was really looking forward to getting up to Chicago. I don't know if I'd have another opportunity to do that. And we had a 3-panel judge panel, and really they were hung up on a procedural rule. Basically, the district court judge did not issue the opinion or the order appropriately. The rule states you have your opinion, and then you have a separate rule on a separate piece of paper. So we spent probably 70% of the time talking about that, which is a little disappointing, but we did have time on our side to get into the merits of the case. And so really I kind of see right now 3 options. One is an outright reversal of the district court's injunction, which I think is unlikely. The second option is that the Seventh Circuit will remand that back down to the district court with some guidance on how to how to come up with a solution for the case. And the third option, which is best case scenario, which is the Seventh Circuit upholds the district court's injunction. So to be very, very clear, hemp flower here in Indiana is 100% legal. We are waiting on this new ruling, which will, unfortunately, we don't have a date certain on that, but it'll be anywhere from a couple weeks to a couple months. And we'll be sure to keep you guys in the loop on that as soon as we hear something. With that, I will end my presentation and happy to take questions now or hang around until Don gets done.
Justin, thank you for that great presentation. I'm going to hold off on the questions till Don goes, but I have one just short question that I hear all the time. Can you just clarify whether you need a license to transport hemp? Don Robertson has been in the seed business for over 30 years. He's worked with the family business, and he's also been an executive, and he's filled almost every position in the seed industry. But what's most important is Don's an avid baseball fan, and he really hopes this year's season's going to get started. So I'm not sure if you're going to talk at all about baseball, Don, but I know you're going to focus on the laws, regulations, and resulting licensing for hemp in Indiana, and discuss how growers, handlers, and researchers are affected by these laws and what their respective responsibilities are. So with that, I hand it over to you, Don.
All right, thanks, Robert. Yeah, first thing I would say is the Reds, Cardinals, and Cubs are all tied for first place in late April here, so that's good news. The bad news is none of them have played a game yet. So, yeah, thanks, Justin, for a great job explaining that. If you want the input from the state chemist on how to go about working very closely with the university and bypassing somewhat the working with doing the research. We've only had a few people who have effectively been able to do that. Most people are still operating with a researcher and doing their own ground, but as a research advisor. But a couple have worked closely enough with a university employee doing the university research on their farms that we've been able to work around that. So he brought up a good point there. Okay, hemp in Indiana, laws, regulations, and licensing for 2020. This is a little bit of a breakdown of a presentation I do at a lot of extension meetings. I just updated it for this presentation, this crowd. Okay, so 2019 numbers. Justin already put up there 5,300 acres planned, 4,200 acres planted, and 3,300 acres harvested. Destruction on that was due to high THC, bad stand, weed pressure. A lot of those things made up the difference. We had a lot of rain and high winds after planting, and that destroyed a lot of the crop. We did a large survey, which Marguerite and I worked on, and the people that grew last year said they were going to grow about 11,000 acres in 2020. So based on 4,200 acres planted last year, 11,000 was the goal for 2020. So keep that number in mind as we go through the presentation. Indoor crop was 28% of the crop, and we had 353,000 square feet of crop planted in 2019. Also keep that number in your mind. At the end of the presentation, we'll give you an idea where we're at right now. One of the things we talk about, and this is a a chart that came out of our internal lab work software, but some varieties really go hot. And as part of the licensing process, we have asked people to check this chart and see if their varieties have a history of going hot on average. So you'll see anything to the right of the vertical arrow was averaged being hot last year. Anything to the left of the vertical arrow averaged not being hot. So one thing I will point out, though, is that the genetics in this industry are all over the board, and genetic names are all over the board. So variety names get intertwined, intermixed when they should not be. And you'll see at the bottom of this chart, you'll see 4 small green arrows. T1 atypical, T2, T1, and Trump. And I see those names being intertwined or intermingled for the same variety on a regular basis. But what we tested as listed as Trump tested over 1% on average. And what we tested as T1 atypical came in at about 0.18, 0.2. So obviously, either there is a difference between different parts of this variety, and I say that with finger quotes there, air quotes, or there's a lot of varietal difference between how this variety handles different inputs and different weather. So this chart is available on Marguerite's website, and it's available by going through our licensing process and clicking on the link. So how do we get here? Justin's basically already handled that. So we'll go through this one very closely. Indiana, as you know, took a conservative approach to the 2014 Farm Bill. We had about 24 acres produced by university and college research only, other than one grower was a university directly tied to a university project and grew through 2018. 2019 is when that opened up, and we'll discuss that on the next slide. Okay, so the 2018 Farm Bill removed hemp from Schedule I drug status, moved hemp from the DEA, but keep that in mind as well, because the interim final rule, which came out in, I believe, October of last year from the USDA, has a heavy-handed DEA section to it. So it has a lot of input from the DEA. Even though hemp is no longer Schedule I drug status, the DEA had a lot of input, a lot of emphasis and input on what was given to the USDA, what the USDA finally put down. USDA rules, total THC 0.30 or lower with a measurement of uncertainty. This measurement of uncertainty will be different for every lab that you get a test from. Our lab at OISC, the measurement of uncertainty is somewhere around 0.085. That has not been completely laid out yet. So that means if you got a 0.385 counting total THC with the measure of uncertainty, and you are below that level, then your crop is still compliant. That's a little bit of a tough thing to understand when it's first presented, but just understand it is 0.30 total, but that measurement of uncertainty has to do with what equipment is being used, how the samples were pulled, all that type of thing. So when people talk about different sampling methods and those type of things, that all works into the measurement of uncertainty. So I believe ours is going to be around 0.085. Don't hold me to that, but it'll be produced as a public number here, probably not too long of that. Piper, the measurement of uncertainty is determined by the lab itself, based on all of the inputs of what equipment is being used, how the sampling and how the testing works. That's a number that we come up with based on a very strict formula that the USDA gives us. One thing to keep in mind, and again, this goes back to the DEA having a lot of input into the the process is anything above a 0.5% is submitted to DEA as a negligent growing operation. So we had probably 12 to 15% of the crop last year was above 0.5. So those farms, those growers would be submitted to the DEA as a negligent growing operation. So that's something to keep in mind. It is very important to do your own testing, to do your own testing on a regular basis once your crop starts to flower, and harvest that crop before it goes hot. If we were to sample and test every planting date of every variety, which the USDA interim final rule requires us to do, OISC would have to hire 27 new inspectors, put in more lab equipment, hire multiple more chemists. That's not feasible as that is written in Indiana, and some other states are finding the same thing. That's why some states' plans were not accepted. That is one of the reasons our state plan was not accepted immediately, but we're working on language with the USDA that will help us to get the state plan approved. And so we'll see probably sometime in May when we resubmit to the USDA our state plan with some edits that we will probably get it approved next time through. Okay, the state plan was submitted December 26th, had the minimums that Justin talked about. That's in section 52 of the Indiana emergency rule. In essence, you've got 20-acre minimum for grain, fiber, or seed grown outside from seed for a seed crop. You've got a 1-acre minimum planted for CBD or from clones or starts outside. And for indoor, there are several different categories, but it basically comes down to you've got a 2,000 square foot minimum to grow indoor in a warehouse, a hoop house, a slat house, a greenhouse, covered structure. Any of those covered structures we are considered to be indoors. And along with that, you either have to have 300 mature plants or 1,500 starts in that house. That is a direct result of some people last year having said they had a 10,000 square foot warehouse. They were growing hemp in. We get there to sample and there's 17 plants. So what we found when dealing with stakeholders is that the stakeholders in the industry in Indiana want legitimate grows. They don't want 6 plants on the back porch. The state law doesn't really allow for 6 plants on the back porch. So we put those minimums in to make sure that people were actually growing a representative crop and something that would be processed by a processor. The USD did deny that for additional comment. Like I say, they'll probably be in May. We'll resubmit the state plan. Next, 2020. Research only again, but blended because we do have the state plan in process and we do have the interim or the emergency rules in place. On the interim final rules by the USDA, there were over 4,000 comments. Total THC was an area of comment. Testing 15 days prior to harvest, that was an area of comment. Testing all fields, which means all growing sites and all varieties and all planting dates of all growing sites. That's some area that we also made a comment on because we don't see that as fiscally possible. We will do our best to adhere to the USDA rules where we can, but that's why we had a blended program. Is we wanted to let them know what we thought was possible in Indiana, given the constraints of time and energy and revenue times. The OISC administrative rule, the key thing here is we don't have the software in place yet to handle the fees. So those fees are being waived for 2020. They will be required to support the program as is required in Senate Enrollment Act 516. We anticipate those fees will be around $750. The software is quite expensive to manage a hemp program and all the different licensing and reporting that goes into that. So we will see Those fees, that's not a final number yet. It is in the emergency rules at $750. By the time it gets in the actual final rule, that number may go up, may go down, but that's the placeholder number we've got right now. Licenses will include growers, handlers, and university employed researchers. We've already talked about this. This is the minimum requirements for space. I just did want to point out again, that's in section 52. The language is being cleaned up a little bit because it was a tad bit vague, but just understand you've got a 2,000 square foot indoor minimum with 1,500 plants of production or clones or starts, or 300 mature plants, 20 contiguous acres per grain, fiber, or seed from seed, planted from seed, and 1 acre minimum for CBD, CBG, smokable hemp, those type of things. The next 3 slides we can just kind of go through very quickly. This is what our application looks like. Because our software is not available, we do have it online as a fillable PDF. There is a document to read in section 3 of our website, our hemp website, to read before you fill out the document. It will make your life and our lives very much easier. It basically is going to walk you through what type of computer and what software you're going to need to get the document filled out quickly and accurately. The next slide shows when we're talking about grow sites, whether they be indoor, outdoor. If you're going to grow outdoors, check the box for outdoor, list the varieties you plan on growing. Don't get hung up on that. We're using that as a placeholder. If you do grow outdoors, list your acres in whole numbers. So if you're going to grow 1.5 acres, list 2. If you're going to grow indoors, list it as square feet. Purpose, we've got the drop down you can see there on the left of the screen. So we've got a way to kind of track for ourselves in the reporting that we have to do to the USDA. If you're going to grow for smokable hemp, click other, and in the other specify box, click smokable hemp. Same thing with CBG. Those are the most common areas we go to there. So then you're going to put in your latitude and longitude in decimal format, your county, and then you'll see a link dead center in the middle of the screen that says see website for information. That's the comment that asks you to check and see if that variety has a history of going hot in Indiana. We are going to continue to update that on the fly as we go through the years so that you can be aware. If somebody's trying to sell you a variety, you can say, hey, you know what? I may not want that variety. It's had a history of going hot in Indiana to a high level, or I may want that variety because it looks like it's only gotten hot one time in Indiana. So we don't make recommendations for varieties, but we do want to give you the updated information. One thing that all the stakeholders agreed upon, and this was something that was very much supported by stakeholders and the Hemp Advisory Committee, was that we want people to have the crop either sold, you have a buyer's agreement, a letter of intent, or that you'll be processing the crop yourself. We do not want to see your contract. We're not looking for that. We're not adjudicating your contracts. We do fully agree with Justin that we think you should probably have that memorialized in an agreement, a legal agreement, legally binding agreement. There's a lot of products sitting in barns in Indiana right now because there was no binding agreement, or the contract was not enforceable because the company went bankrupt, went out of business. So do your due diligence, do your homework. Okay, so I'm going to finish up with a couple of slides here, 3 slides on what the current numbers are for 2020. This might spur a little bit of questions, a little bit of comment. We have 247 total hemp licenses. Right now we have, out of that, about 219 that are growers. If you'll remember or have been on any other webinars that I've done, we're going to cut that off at 300 growers in 2020, so we still have plenty of room for people to apply to be a grower. We will not limit handlers, and quite frankly, I don't know if we'll even limit growers because we may not hit that number. But I've broken down outdoor and indoor on the next 2 slides. So outdoor grow sites, we have 445 grow sites for 8,700 acres. So you'll remember early in the process of this presentation, I talked about those growers last year said they were going to have 11,000 acres outside. That does not seem to be in place this year because a lot of people are being more conservative, quite frankly. So, which is probably a good thing. Last year was a 31 acre average. This year is a 19 acre average. I'm not going to go through all of these. The presentation will be on the YouTube channel, but some things to point out. 5,700 acres of outdoor CBD, 586 outdoor acres of grain, seed, and oil crops, and then other, which is smokable hemp, CBG, averages 11.96 acres. So the minimum on smokable hemp and CBG would be 1 acre. So that's a pretty high average. We think people are really going after those markets. On the next slide, I've got indoor grow site information. 176 indoor grow sites. So I think we've got a total of about 650 grow sites between outdoor and indoor, somewhere around that range. 1.72 million square feet indoor. So compare that to last year where we had 353,000 square feet. This year we've got 1.72 million square feet. So it looks like the growth, the real growth this year is going to be indoor rather than outdoor, probably because of the weather we had last year. There was so much negative effects of the weather. CBD, 1.14 million CBD square feet, an average of 10,000 square feet indoor. And as we know, if you're going to grow indoor, you're going to have the opportunity to harvest multiple times a year if you wanted to do that. And then I believe the next slide is just my questions slide. Okay, thank you very much for allowing me to present. Are there questions?
Yep.
Robert?
So Don, thank you very much. And I want to just report that Justin's here. He's got full audio. He can hear us now. Wave if you can hear, Justin.
Great.
So I have a couple of questions. First, Don, you showed a slide about state plans and USDA. Can you talk a little bit about, are there plans for USDA to take over some of the state plans?
Yes.
Can you explain?
New Hampshire. Yeah, New Hampshire has given the program directly over to the USDA and said it's your baby. So in New Hampshire, USDA will hire the samplers, hire the testing done, do all of the work, and the New Hampshire Department of Agriculture will not be involved. Maryland is toying with that idea, but it is not confirmed what will happen there yet. So some states are actually saying, you know what, we don't think we can do everything that you want us to do, so we're just going to dump it in your lap.
So Don, the next question was, what considerations to the 0.3% number will be revisited? Do you think we're stuck at that with total THC? And this could also go to Justin too, so maybe you both want to comment. Or do you think we're going to revisit the Delta-9?
That was probably an area of the most comments on the USDA interim final rules. There is a big push, even by some senators, to move that up to 0.8 or 1%. I think it's been pretty clear from the USDA, at least for the next 2 to 3 years, they're not going to review that. I really think that we're at 0.3 for the next at least 2 to 3 years in my mind.
Hey, Robert, could I chime in on that real quick?
Sure.
So this is an area where as Don mentioned, again, it's a hotly contested area. If you guys have issues with this, the number one thing you can do is call your congressman and your senator at the federal level. We did that on behalf of Midwest Hemp Council and worked with Senator Braun and Representative Baird's office, where they submitted a letter asking for that total THC threshold to be moved to 1%. So I think you're going to be really the only way that's going to change is at the federal level. I don't see the Indiana General Assembly, bucking the trend and putting our threshold at 1%, just because of the unknowns, what that would do with our authority here with our state plan.
Thanks, Justin. Do you have any form letters that you can get out to the membership that outline that they can get to their representatives?
So we have our infographic we came out with right after the USDA interim final rules came out that really highlights, I think it's 4 of the 5 areas. So that can be a really good base for, using language to hit on. We really encourage, instead of form letters, take our base, that's fine. But you got to really figure out a way to personalize it and figure out how you can make it your own, because that has a much bigger impact than the form letters do.
Okay, thank you.
But that is on our website, Robert.
So, Justin, you mentioned that you think that most people should try to achieve the total THC level when they're doing their testing and analysis. You also mentioned that there's a great disparity in the CBD content when you use Delta-9 versus total THC. So if someone is going to grow using Delta-9, for example, in Illinois, what other considerations do they have to take into account so that they are legal?
For here in Indiana?
No, if they're in Illinois, in a neighboring state, which
Yep.
is Delta-9, what other
Right.
considerations in their operation would they need to take into account? For
Well,
example,
I think
where it's
really,
going to be processed, how it's transported. Maybe
Yeah,
you can touch on that.
Yeah. I mean, that's the importance of understanding kind of your own supply chain and what you're doing with it. And you need to really make yourself have a firm understanding of the laws and where you're operating. Even if you're not an attorney, you need to understand that as a business. And really the only difference is in the Delta-9 versus total THC states. Really it comes down to the CBD farmers, because it allows that higher THC content threshold, allows the farmer to get that plant in a more mature state and get a much better yield than having it harvested earlier with the total THC.
All right, thank you. Don, a question here is on sampling. That's a big issue. Can you talk a little bit about how sampling's changed this year and how it will be done and where the state will support that?
Yeah, that's actually in our inspection crew. So it's a little bit out of my area of expertise right now, but I know that the USDA is coming up with a recommended sampling program that would be used across states. And most likely we would follow that USDA sampling program. Currently ours has not changed from last year. We would sample the bud of the plant. I see the actual question. So we would sample the bud of the plant, the top part of the plant, but I believe we have intention to follow the USDA's guideline on that as they make that get a final determination on that. We think that's an area that nationwide probably needs to be turned into something where everybody's doing the same thing on that. And so we're watching that closely, yes.
Justin, anything to add?
Yeah, that's a great question because it really matters. This is a nuanced question, but it can really mean the difference between a farmer being able to harvest their crop or not. We're one of the few states that does take that, the top 1 inch or 2 inch of the plant. I guess from my personal view, I don't think that's really a true representative sample of what the farmer's selling. And so that's a really great question. I think the USDA guidelines, I don't know if they're finalized yet or not on the sampling, but they're looking at about 1/3 of the plant to be tested, which is much closer, I think, to a realistic representation of the plant. And just keep in mind, the highest concentration of THC and cannabinoids is in the top of the plant, that top flower bud. So we just want to make sure we're putting our farmers in a position to be as successful as possible on the sampling guidelines.
Thank you. Don, here's a question. If you're a vertically integrated operation, do you need multiple license and will you have to pay multiple fees in the future?
If you are, well, the only reason you would pay multiple fees is if you are handling someone else's crop. If you are growing your own crop, processing your own crop, transporting and creating products, and out of your own crop, you just need the one grower license for one fee. If you are handling anybody else's crop, then you would be considered a handler, and you would pay the 2 different fees and get the 2 different licenses.
Okay, thank you. And Justin, we've talked about this before. Maybe you could just elaborate. Do you need license to transport hemp?
Yeah, and that's yes, you do. Well, okay, let me back up. if you're growing your own crop, you do not need a handler's license to take your crop somewhere. Your grower's license will cover you for that. But really, for any other purpose, if you're handling biomass, you need a license here in Indiana. That's about as simple as I can make it.
All right, that's pretty clear. Thank you. I think this might be for Don. What is the minimum contiguous acreage you need to grow seed?
Currently, that's a 20-acre field, and the reason that it is actually 20 acres is that you're going to need enough seed off of that to get cleaned, processed, handled. Now, one way around that, if you're going to have a seed breeding farm, you can actually have less than 5 acres for a seed breeding farm. But that seed breeding farm is for production of new varieties, not for production of seed for sale. So that's the difference there. So if you're going to grow seed for new varieties, it's less than 5 acres. If you're going to grow seed for seed production, which we believe most of that seed production will probably be for fiber or grain, then that's a 20-acre field or more.
Okay, thank you. Don, do you know what percentage of the licenses that have been issued to date are new license and which ones are renewed?
You know, that's a fantastic question. I do not have the answer to that, but if I'm going to guess, because I see all the data, I just haven't crunched the data. If I'm going to guess, 2/3 of this year's licenses are renewed.
Okay.
That's a guess.
Don and Justin, thank you very much. You both do yeoman's work here at the state and for the Midwest. We appreciate all that you've done and the great presentations you had. So thank you for your time.